It's Tuesday, the 15th of October, and last Friday, on 11 October, the other shoe dropped over at Boeing Corporation, but it didn't drop very far. My name's Juan Brown, you're watching the Blancolirio channel, and let's see if we can make some sense of this. This update is brought to you by Santa Barbara Chocolates, Santa Barbara, California, purveyors of fine chocolate and wholesale chocolate supplies for your chocolate making activities. And all my $5 a month patrons who have subscribed on Patreon. Thank you so much for your support of this channel. On Friday, the 11th of October, after Wall Street had closed for the day and before the long weekend, Dennis Muilenburg was demoted as chairman of the board of directors at Boeing. However, he will retain his position at this time as CEO, chief executive officer, and as a member of the board on the board of directors at Boeing. He will no longer, however, be the chairman of the board at Boeing. In his place will be Boeing board member David Calhoun, who comes from an experience with General Electric. He was the head of aircraft over at General Electric, the aircraft division, and he has experience running or working with Caterpillar Corporation as well, during some rather tumultuous times. David Calhoun was selected. He's a board member on the board of directors. He was selected by the board to replace Muilenburg as the chairman of the board. Mr. Calhoun has been on the board at Boeing since 2009, so he's been around since the inception of the 737 MAX. And according to the Wall Street Journal, David Calhoun has little patience for managers who don't make their goals. Now, according to the Seattle Times, this position where the CEO of Boeing is also the chairman of the board of directors was inherited from Jim McNerney, predecessor to Muilenburg. But if you look at Boeing history, it appears that this arrangement has been used on and off since the 1930s, where the CEO is both CEO and chairman of the board of directors. The best articles written on this subject is by Dominic Gates, the Seattle Times reporter that has the pulse on Boeing. Now, Dominic mentions that this arrangement, the previous arrangement with Muilenburg being both the CEO and the chairman of the board of directors at Boeing, gave him a position of unassailable power. And it gave him the ability to control the direction and the makeup of the board. And that the board of directors at Boeing needs to be more independent. Now let's do a little review of corporate governance to see how this actually works. If I recall from business class, which I never took as a pilot, don't take business advice from a pilot, don't take investment advice from a pilot. We're terrible investors. But as I understand it, the board of directors of any corporation works for the stakeholders. The stakeholders include the employees of the corporation and the shareholders as well. And the shareholders elect the board of directors each year during their annual meeting through proxy voting. The board of directors then run the strategic governance of the company, approve all the budgets, do the hiring and the firing of the CEO, determines the salaries and benefits of other non-employee upper management types, approves the budgets and governs the organization from a strategic point of view. It is then the CEO or the chief executive officer who works at the will of the board of directors. But if the CEO is at once the chairman of the board of directors, how do you separate that line of power? That's the part of executive compensation that simple pilots like us don't quite understand. So this management scheme, which is fairly common throughout the business world, was broken up at Boeing on Friday, on the 11th, so that, to quote, Muilenburg, the CEO, can focus full-time on running the company. Now here's what I really think. What I really think is Dave Calhoun is coming in as this is my opinion by the way, is coming in as the chairman of the board. He has little patience for managers that don't make their goals. He's basically putting Muilenburg on notice saying, you got to get this company unscrewed out of this 737 MAX disaster, and then we'll review your performance and review the possibility of you continuing as CEO. In fact, what's probably going to happen is Calhoun will end up becoming CEO of Boeing once the 737 MAXs are back in the air. But that's just my opinion. Not only is this change coming with the looming 30 October presentation before Congress, but there are also 3 separate reports that preceded this change. Let's talk about each of those. Each of these reports are big and detailed and deserve a video each of their own here on the Blancolirio channel. But let's give you a quick broad overview. First up is Boeing's own internal Aerospace Safety Committee, which was a group of 4 guys from outside of Boeing, spent 5 months studying the problem at Boeing, and came up with a plan on 25 September, where basically engineers now are going to now report directly to the chief engineer, and that chief engineer is then going to report to the CEO, as opposed to the previous program where the thousands of engineers reported to individual division chiefs, and therefore intermixing in too much of the, dare I say, bean counters in with the engineering. So we get engineering a direct line up to the chief engineer and to the CEO. Next up is the Joint Authorities Tech Review, which came out on Friday, the 11th of October. This was honchoed by Chris Hart, former member of the NTSB. The Joint Authorities Technical Review report deals more with how the FAA process certifies aircraft today and needs to be updated. It's given a list, a 28-page report, and over 11 recommendations to the FAA as to how they need to consider the way they do business in certifying aircraft today, especially when it comes to changing older designs. And I think the new FAA head, Steve Dixon, is going to have a heck of a time implementing all the recommendations that this report suggests. And the third report is the NTSB report that came out on 19 September. Assumptions used in safety assessment. And the third report is the NTSB report that came out on 19 September. Assumptions used in safety assessment process and the effects of multiple alert indications on pilot performance. This gets to the meat and potatoes of the issue of the 2 crashes that we've been discussing at length here on this channel, that these pilots of these aircraft were completely overwhelmed by the alarming array of alerts and warnings and false indications that they were receiving in the cockpit of these aircraft that belied the fact that the solution to this was a simple runaway trim procedure. This also gets to the point where William Langawisha in the New York Times review missed the point, and we talked about this before here on the Blancolirio channel. Though he had a lot of good points, he missed the point altogether that he threw the pilots under the bus without proper consideration for the overwhelming amount of false information these pilots were receiving that forced them into a tunnel vision type reaction and led them down the rosy path of destruction. And I'll have links to all this source material in the video description below. This was reinforced by a recent New York Times editorial, thanks for your links to this article, where Captain Chesley Sullenberger said that Langawisha was wrong in his assessment of this crash of the Boeing 737 MAX. It was not a simple runaway trim failure. It's a failure between human interface with new technology. So each of these 3 reports have a lot of detailed information that deserve their own separate video here on the Blancolirio channel. I'll get to them as time permits. Meanwhile, I hope this explains the shakeup of the management at Boeing. Thanks for your support on Patreon, and thank you, Santa Barbara Chocolates, for your sponsorship of this channel. See you here.